She looked at him, smiled, and said, "If I were younger, I would marry you." He thought she was joking. But one sentence on that old Tennessee porch forced Ethan to confront the truth he had been running from for years. It was not the past holding him back. It was not love. It was fear. And before that summer was over, he would discover that sometimes the heart does not need to forget what it lost. It only needs the courage to love again. Sometimes, God does not remove the pain from our lives all at once. Sometimes, He sends a quiet conversation, a kind person, a porch beneath an open sky, or a moment that gently reminds us that our story is not over. Ethan believed that holding on to grief was the only way to honor the love he had lost. But God showed him something deeper. Love is not a small candle that goes out when another light appears. It is a fire that can keep growing. The people we have loved will always leave a mark on our hearts. Their memories do not disappear because we laugh again, hope again, or open our hearts to someone new. Maybe that is one of God's quiet miracles. He can take the places inside us that feel broken, empty, and beyond repair, and slowly fill them with courage, purpose, and unexpected love. In everyday life, many people are standing at their own closed door. Some are afraid to trust again. Some are afraid to begin again. Some are still carrying pain from a loss, a failure, a betrayal, or a dream that did not come true. But perhaps the miracle is not always that the past disappears. Perhaps the miracle is finding the strength to take one more step forward while carrying it. So do not let fear convince you that your best days are behind you. Do not believe that your heart has no room left for hope. God may be preparing a new beginning in the very place where you thought your life had ended. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us. Do you believe God can bring second chances when we least expect them? And subscribe to the channel for more stories of faith, kindness, healing, and hope. May God bless you, protect your family, heal the places in your heart that still hurt, and guide you toward the beautiful new chapter waiting ahead. Late summer heat rested softly over the Tennessee hills, while cicadas hummed beyond the fields and storm clouds gathered far behind the blue horizon. Ethan Brooks arrived just before sunset in a dusty silver pickup truck that looked older than he felt, though neither had been cared for properly in months. At 28, Ethan had the broad shoulders of a man who once worked long hours without complaint, but grief had quietly changed the way he carried himself. His dark brown hair was usually neat, though now it had grown slightly too long around his ears. A short, uneven beard shadowed his sharp jawline. He had gray-blue eyes, the kind people used to call calm, but lately they looked distant, as though he was always listening for someone who would never answer. 3 years earlier, Ethan had been engaged to a woman named Lily Harper, a bright, gentle nurse with chestnut hair and a laugh that made strangers smile. Lily had been patient with everyone, even the difficult people Ethan avoided. She believed kindness was not weakness, only courage wearing softer clothes. Then one rainy night, a driver ran through a red light. Lily never made it home. Ethan had not been in the car, but guilt had found him anyway. It settled inside him like a tenant who refused to leave. He replayed their last conversation constantly. She had asked him to come with her that evening, but he had stayed late at work. He knew the accident was not his fault. Everyone told him that. Yet logic was a thin blanket against a winter that lived inside his chest. After Lily's funeral, Ethan stopped accepting invitations. He answered messages late, avoided restaurants they once visited, and let his apartment become painfully quiet. He still worked at an engineering firm in Columbus, Ohio, reviewing building plans and fixing problems that belonged safely on paper. But even there, he moved through his days like a ghost wearing work boots. He smiled when required and spoke only when necessary. His older sister, Sarah Brooks, was the first person who refused to pretend she could not see it. Sarah was 34, tall and slender, with warm brown skin, thoughtful hazel eyes, and thick black curls she often tied into a loose bun. She had a practical voice, the kind that could calm a frightened child or challenge a stubborn adult without ever becoming cruel. Since their parents had died years earlier, Sarah had become the steady center of Ethan's life, though she never allowed him to treat her like a replacement. One Sunday afternoon, she arrived at his apartment carrying grocery bags and the expression of someone preparing to win an argument. "You need to leave this place for a while," she told him as she put vegetables into his nearly empty refrigerator. Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter and tried to joke. What? Are you evicting me from my own apartment? Sarah gave him a look. No. I am suggesting that fresh air might be less dramatic than living beside frozen pizza and memories. Despite himself, Ethan laughed once. It surprised him how unfamiliar the sound felt in his own home. Sarah told him she had found a small bed and breakfast outside Knoxville, Tennessee, owned by a woman who rented rooms to travelers. It is quiet, she said. No crowded tourist traps. Just hills, gardens, country roads, and enough space for you to remember who you are. Ethan wanted to refuse. Leaving Ohio felt disloyal, as though distance might erase Lily more completely than time already had. But Sarah sat beside him on the faded couch and lowered her voice. You are not protecting her by disappearing, she said. You are only punishing yourself because you survived. The sentence stayed with him for days. A week later, Ethan requested unpaid leave from work, packed one suitcase, and drove south before he could talk himself out of it. By late afternoon, Tennessee opened around him in wide green fields, weathered barns, and winding roads lined with oak trees. The bed and breakfast stood at the end of a gravel drive, an old white farmhouse with a deep porch and climbing roses around the railings. It looked peaceful in a way that almost made Ethan uncomfortable. Before he had fully stepped from the truck, the front door opened. A woman came outside carrying a basket of folded linens against her hip. She was Claire Morgan, 32 years old, with soft auburn hair falling in loose waves over one shoulder and clear green eyes that noticed more than they revealed. Claire was not overly glamorous, but there was something quietly striking about her. The confidence in her posture, the warmth in her smile, the calm steadiness in her voice. She wore faded jeans, a pale blue blouse, and worn leather boots marked with the kind of scuffs that came from doing real work. Mr. Brooks? She asked, walking down the porch steps. Ethan nodded, suddenly aware of his wrinkled shirt and tired face. Ethan is fine, he said. Claire smiled gently. Then I am Claire. Welcome to Morgan House. I hope you found the drive peaceful. He looked back at the road behind him, then toward the fields glowing gold beneath the lowering sun. For the first time in a long time, he said quietly, I think I might have. Claire did not ask why. She simply picked up one end of his suitcase and said, Then let us start there. By Ethan's fourth morning at Morgan House, the farmhouse had begun to feel less like a place he was hiding in and more like a place that noticed when he was quiet. The sun rose slowly over the Tennessee fields, turning the tall grass silver before warming it into gold. Somewhere beyond the barn, a rooster complained about the morning as if he had personally invented it. Ethan sat on the porch steps with a chipped ceramic mug between his hands. He had slept badly again, but the air smelled of wet soil and coffee instead of city traffic and old apartment walls. Claire stepped outside carrying a second mug. She wore a soft cream sweater over faded jeans, her auburn hair loosely braided down her back. Without asking, she placed the coffee beside him. You look like you have been arguing with the moon all night, she said. Ethan glanced toward her. The moon won. Claire smiled. It usually does. Very smug, that moon. He laughed softly, and for a second, the sound seemed to surprise both of them. Their mornings slowly developed a rhythm neither had planned. Claire brought coffee. Ethan helped carry chairs from the lawn or stacked firewood near the side door. Then they sat together for a few quiet minutes before the guests woke up and the farmhouse filled with footsteps, dishes, and polite small talk. Claire never pressed him for answers. That was what made Ethan begin to offer them. One morning, he told her about his old engineering job in Columbus. He explained how he used to enjoy fixing problems because every problem had measurements, materials, and a visible solution. Claire leaned against the porch rail, listening with both hands wrapped around her mug. And now, she asked gently. Now I look at a blueprint and think about everything that can collapse, Ethan said. Claire did not say that he was being dramatic. She only nodded, as though she understood exactly how a person could become frightened of things that once made sense. Later that afternoon, Ethan found her repairing a loose fence near the vegetable garden. She had one boot braced against the lower rail, a hammer in her hand, and a frustrated expression that did not belong on someone usually so calm. You need help? He asked. Claire looked over her shoulder. Only if you promise not to tell anyone I lost a fight with a fence. Ethan took the hammer from her. I have seen worse battles. That sounds suspiciously personal. It is. I once lost to a folding chair. Claire laughed so suddenly that she had to press one hand over her mouth. It was the first time Ethan saw her laugh without holding anything back. Her green eyes narrowed at the corners, and a faint dimple appeared in her left cheek. For reasons he could not explain, the sight stayed with him long after the fence was fixed. Over the next several days, they talked whenever the house allowed it. Claire told him she had once planned to become a landscape designer. She loved old gardens, wildflowers, and the strange beauty of plants growing in places where nobody expected them to survive. But when her parents became ill, she returned home to care for them. After they passed away, she inherited the farmhouse, a stack of unpaid bills, and a younger brother who was still trying to figure out what kind of man he wanted to become. Claire never spoke bitterly about it. Still, Ethan noticed the tiredness she carried beneath her calm voice, like a lamp that had been left burning too long. One evening, they sat on the porch after dinner while the guests gathered inside around a board game. The sky had turned peach-colored, and the first fireflies began blinking above the flower beds. Claire brought out a tray of warm cinnamon rolls, the kind that made the entire porch smell like childhood and bad decisions. "You made these?" Ethan asked. She handed him one. "I did, but I will deny everything if they are terrible." He took a bite and closed his eyes. "These are dangerous," he said. Claire tilted her head. "Dangerous? If I stay here much longer, I will need to buy larger pants." "That is the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me." Ethan laughed, then tried to tell her about the time he burned an entire pan of pancakes while attempting to cook breakfast for Lily. The story was not particularly funny, but Claire laughed anyway, her shoulders shaking as she leaned back in the porch chair. For a moment, Ethan forgot to be careful. He forgot the grief. He forgot the guilt. He forgot the habit of keeping every good feeling at arm's length. Claire looked at him in the fading light, and something in her expression changed. It was not pity. It was not sympathy. It was recognition. Then she said, softly but playfully, "If I were younger, I would marry you." Ethan blinked. He looked at her, waiting for the joke to continue. Claire's smile remained, but her eyes grew more serious. "What?" he asked. "I said if I were younger, I would marry you," she repeated. Ethan gave a small, uncertain laugh. "Claire, you are 32. And you are 28, she said. "I am aware. I can still do basic subtraction." He looked down at the cinnamon roll in his hand, suddenly unable to think of anything clever. Claire set her own plate aside. "You know the age difference is not the reason you would never let yourself love someone again," she said quietly. Ethan's chest tightened. "Claire." "No," she said, not sharply but firmly. "You do not have to explain anything to me. But you should stop pretending you are only being respectful to the past." He turned toward her slowly. The fields behind her had gone dark, and the porch light cast a warm glow across her face. "What do you mean?" he asked. Claire's voice softened. "You are not afraid of meeting someone new, Ethan. You are afraid that if you love someone again, you will lose them too." The words landed between them with the weight of something old and true. Ethan could not answer. For the first time in 3 years, someone had named the fear he had spent every day trying to hide. The morning after Claire's words, Ethan woke before sunrise with her voice still moving through his thoughts like a door that would not stay closed. He lay in the narrow guest room bed, staring at the pale ceiling, angry not at her, but at how accurately she had seen him. He avoided the porch at breakfast. Instead, he took his coffee in the kitchen, pretending to study the weather report on his phone while rain clouds gathered over the hills. Claire passed through twice, carrying clean towels and fresh flowers for the dining table, but she did not ask why he had disappeared. That restraint made him feel worse. By afternoon, Ethan left Morgan House and followed a narrow country road bordered by split-rail fences and tall grass. The sky hung low and gray, and the wind moved through the trees with the restless sound of someone searching for the right words. He walked farther than he intended. His boots collected red clay, and the first drops of rain darkened the shoulders of his jacket. With every step, he replayed the sentence Claire had spoken. "You are afraid that if you love someone again, you will lose them too." He wanted to call it unfair. Claire did not know every detail of his life. She had not stood in the hospital hallway where a doctor had spoken with careful eyes and a tired voice. She had not watched Lily's mother collapse into a chair while the world continued moving outside the windows. But the truth did not become less true simply because it hurt. For 3 years, Ethan had told himself he was honoring Lily by refusing to move forward. He had treated sorrow like a promise. He had believed that happiness would mean he had loved her less. Yet walking alone beneath the darkening sky, he finally understood something he had avoided. He was not protecting Lily's memory. He was hiding behind it. By the time he returned to Morgan House, rain was falling hard enough to turn the gravel drive into a shining ribbon. The farmhouse windows glowed warmly, but the air felt tense. A gust of wind bent the flower beds nearly flat, and thunder rolled across the valley. Claire stood inside the front doorway, watching the sky. Her auburn hair had come loose from its braid, and worry tightened the gentle lines around her green eyes. "The storm is moving faster than they expected," she said. "The county just issued a warning for flash flooding." Ethan nodded, then noticed several guests gathered behind her. One was Mrs. Helen Price, a 74-year-old retired school librarian with silver hair cut neatly at her chin and a cane decorated with tiny painted sunflowers. She had been staying at Morgan House for a quiet week after the death of her sister, and though she spoke politely, she carried herself with the fragile caution of someone afraid the world might take another thing away. Near the dining room window stood Daniel Ruiz, a 36-year-old airport mechanic with a lean build, close-cropped black hair, and a calm face made serious by the storm. He had planned to catch an evening flight to Atlanta for his daughter's birthday, but the roads were already becoming dangerous. A young couple named Mark and Olivia Carter sat beside the fireplace with their two small children, trying to sound cheerful as the lights flickered above them. Mark, broad-shouldered and red-haired, kept checking his phone for updates. Olivia, a soft-spoken woman with long dark blonde hair, held both children close whenever thunder cracked. Then the power went out. For a moment, the house became completely still. Claire did not panic. She moved quickly, lighting candles, checking flashlights, and assigning practical tasks with a steady voice. She asked Ethan to bring blankets from the linen closet and help Daniel secure the back door where rain was blowing through the frame. When Mrs. Price quietly mentioned that her medication needed refrigeration, Claire did not dismiss the concern. She found a small cooler, packed it with ice from the freezer, and asked Ethan to help carry it to the porch before the ice melted. When Daniel learned the airport shuttle had canceled, his jaw tightened with disappointment. Claire took out an old paper map, called a neighbor with a four-wheel drive truck, and arranged for him to leave safely once the worst of the rain passed. There was no applause, no dramatic speech. Claire simply moved from one problem to the next, refusing to let fear become the loudest voice in the room. Later, while candles flickered across the dining table, she sat on the floor with Mark and Olivia's children and taught them a simple card game. The children began laughing, and even Mrs. Price smiled from her chair. Ethan watched Claire from across the room. He had thought love was mostly about the grand moments, promises, rings, wedding vows, and words spoken beneath beautiful skies. But Claire showed him another kind of love. Love was finding ice for someone's medicine. Love was making calls until a stranded man had a way home. Love was kneeling on a wooden floor to make frightened children laugh while a storm pressed against the windows. It was not performance. It was presence. And as Ethan stood there in the candlelight, surrounded by strangers who no longer felt entirely alone, he felt something inside him shift. Claire had not asked him to forget Lily. She had only reminded him that love had never been meant to become a locked room. Outside, the storm continued to rage across the Tennessee hills. But inside Morgan House, Ethan began to understand that maybe the bravest thing a person could do was not avoid loss. Maybe it was choosing to care anyway. By dawn, the storm had moved beyond the Tennessee hills, leaving the world washed clean and strangely tender. Water clung to the porch railings in clear beads. The fields shone beneath the first pale sunlight, and the air smelled of wet earth, cedar wood, and coffee beginning to brew somewhere inside the farmhouse. Ethan had barely slept. He had spent most of the night on the edge of his bed, listening to rain fade against the roof and replaying every small thing he had seen Claire do. The way she had steadied Mrs. Price's hands while checking the medicine cooler. The way she had stayed calm when Daniel feared he would miss his daughter's birthday. The way she had made frightened children laugh without pretending the storm was not real. None of it had been dramatic. That was why it mattered. By the time Ethan stepped onto the porch, Claire was already there. She sat in the old wooden swing near the front door, wrapped in a gray cardigan with the sleeves pushed to her elbows. Her auburn hair was loose around her shoulders, slightly messy from the long night. and there were faint shadows beneath her green eyes. For the first time since he had met her, she looked tired enough to let the world see it. A small orange cat sat beside her on the swing, its tail curled around its paws. Ethan had seen the cat around the property before, but had never been properly introduced. Claire noticed him looking. "That is Marmalade," she said quietly. "He is 9 years old, overweight, suspicious of strangers, and completely convinced this porch belongs to him." Marmalade opened one golden eye, examined Ethan with the solemn disappointment of an old landlord, then returned to sleep. Ethan smiled. "I think he has my personality." Claire looked over at him. "You are not orange. Give it time." The joke was small, but it softened something between them. Ethan took a seat on the porch step, leaving space between them. He stared across the wet fields, watching sunlight gather slowly along the tops of the grass. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "I need to tell you something." Claire did not turn toward him immediately. She let the silence remain open, as if she understood that some truths needed room before they could breathe. "I loved Lily," Ethan said. His voice caught slightly on her name. "I still do, in a way. I think part of me always will." Claire nodded once. "She was supposed to come home that night," he continued. "She called me from the parking lot before she left the hospital. She asked if I wanted to meet her for dinner. I said no because I had too much work." His hands tightened around each other. "I know the accident was not my fault. I know that. But after she died, I started thinking that if I had gone with her, maybe she would have lived. Or maybe I would have been there. Maybe she would not have been alone." The words came faster now, pulled from a place he had kept locked for years. "And after that, I made this rule for myself. I told myself I could not love anyone the same way again. Not because I did not want to, because I thought it would mean I had left her behind." Claire looked at him then. There was no pity in her face, no impatience, only a quiet sadness that made him feel understood rather than exposed. "Ethan," she said softly, "loving someone new would not erase what you had with Lily." He looked down. "It feels like it would." "That is because grief makes people believe love is limited," Claire replied. "Like the heart is a room with one chair in it, and if someone new sits down, someone else has to disappear." The porch swing creaked gently as she shifted closer. "But that is not how it works," she said. "The heart is not a room. It is more like a house that keeps finding new doors." Ethan swallowed hard. Claire glanced toward the fields before continuing. "My parents are gone. I still miss them every day. I miss my mother's cooking, even though she somehow believed every vegetable needed cream sauce. I miss my father singing the wrong words to every song on the radio." A soft smile touched her face, then faded. "When they died, I thought loving anyone else deeply would hurt too much. I thought I had already used up my courage. But then my brother needed me. This house needed me. Guests came here carrying their own losses. And slowly, I learned that love does not betray what came before it." She turned back to Ethan. "It honors it." The words settled inside him with a force he could not explain. For years, he had treated his grief like a locked gate. He had stood in front of it, guarding the pain because he thought opening it would somehow let Lily vanish. But maybe Lily had never needed him to stay broken. Maybe the love they had shared had been real enough to survive his decision to live again. The morning passed quietly after that. By afternoon, the roads had cleared enough for the remaining guests to leave. Daniel made it to the airport with time to spare. Mrs. Price hugged Claire before getting into her niece's car. Even Marmalade wandered down the porch steps, as if personally inspecting the aftermath. 2 days later, Ethan packed his suitcase. He stood beside his truck with Claire near the gravel drive, both of them pretending the goodbye was casual. "I should get back to Ohio," he said. "My leave ends Monday." Claire nodded. "Of course. I do not know what happens next." "You do not have to know," she said. He looked at her, really looked at her. "I do know I do not want to disappear again." Claire's smile was gentle, but her eyes brightened. "Then do not." The drive back to Ohio felt different from the drive south. Ethan still missed Lily. He still carried grief. But when he reached his apartment that evening, he did not sit alone in the dark. He called Claire. Their first conversation lasted 15 minutes. The next one lasted an hour. Soon, the calls became part of every evening. Coffee before work, messages during lunch, quiet conversations before sleep. Weeks later, Ethan drove back to Tennessee for a weekend. Then Claire visited Ohio, where Sarah greeted her with a knowing smile and enough homemade food to feed a football team. Neither Ethan nor Claire called it love. Not yet. But something had begun. And for the first time in years, Ethan did not run from it. A year later, Ethan Brooks drove back down the same gravel road that had once carried him toward Morgan House with nothing but one suitcase, a tired heart, and no idea what he was looking for. This time, the Tennessee hills were bright beneath an early autumn sky. The fields rolled green and gold beyond the fences, and the old white farmhouse stood at the end of the drive exactly as he remembered it. Climbing roses curled around the porch rails. Wind moved gently through the oak trees. Even the mailbox leaned at the same crooked angle, as if it had never once considered standing properly for anyone. But Ethan was no longer the same man who had arrived there a year before. At 29, he still had the same dark brown hair, gray-blue eyes, broad shoulders, and quiet way of speaking. He still carried Lily's memory with him. Some mornings, he still woke with the old ache pressing against his chest before he remembered where he was. But grief no longer ruled every room inside him. He had returned to work in Ohio, taken on projects again, and even laughed with coworkers without feeling guilty afterward. He had visited Lily's grave on the anniversary of her death, bringing the white lilies she used to love. For the first time, he had not apologized to her for continuing his life. He had simply stood there in the summer wind and said, "Thank you." Then he had driven home and called Claire. Claire had grown more certain of herself during that year, though she would have laughed at anyone who said so. She still wore faded jeans when she worked in the garden. Her auburn hair was still usually tied back when guests were arriving. Her green eyes still had that calm way of seeing through people without making them feel exposed. But now Morgan House was busier than ever. Claire had added 2 new guest rooms, planted a larger vegetable garden, and finally repaired the old barn roof that had been threatening to fall apart since before Ethan first arrived. She had also learned that Ethan was dangerously competent with a hammer, but hopeless when asked to fold fitted sheets. "You make them look like defeated ghosts," Claire had told him once. "They are impossible," Ethan had replied. "They are fabric. They are fabric with evil intentions." Claire had laughed so hard that Marmalade, now 10 years old and even rounder than before, had lifted his head from the porch chair and looked offended by the noise. Ethan and Claire had spent the year traveling back and forth between Ohio and Tennessee. Some weekends, he drove south after work and arrived with takeout containers and tired eyes. Other times, Claire took the bus to Ohio, where Sarah welcomed her with warm hugs, practical questions, and enough food to make the refrigerator surrender. Sarah had become fond of Claire almost immediately. "She is too good for you," Sarah told Ethan one evening while Claire was helping set the table. Ethan frowned. "That is encouraging." "It is realistic," Sarah said. "Try not to ruin it." Claire had heard every word and smiled into the kitchen towel she was holding. Over time, Ethan also met Claire's younger brother, Noah Morgan. Noah was 24, lean and tall, with sandy brown hair that fell into his eyes whenever he worked outdoors. He had a narrow face, a crooked grin, and the restless energy of someone who had spent years pretending he did not need help. After their parents became ill, Noah had watched Claire give up nearly everything to keep the family together. That history had made him fiercely protective of her, though he hid it behind jokes and teasing. At first, Noah had watched Ethan carefully. "You hurt her. I will hide every wrench you own," he said during their first long conversation in the barn. Ethan looked at him. "That feels strangely specific." "I know where people keep tools," Noah replied. But slowly, Noah saw how Ethan listened to Claire, how he showed up when he said he would, how he helped without needing praise. And little by little, his suspicions softened into respect. Now, on this warm September evening, the garden behind Morgan House glowed beneath strings of small lights. Claire had arranged a simple dinner for family and a few guests who had become friends over the past year. Mrs. Helen Price had returned for another visit, still carrying her sunflower cane and still pretending she was not sentimental. Daniel Ruiz had driven in from Atlanta with his daughter, who now had a small notebook filled with drawings of airplanes. Mark and Olivia Carter had come with their children, who ran between the flower beds until Olivia reminded them not to destroy the roses. The people gathered there had all witnessed some part of Ethan and Claire's beginning. Claire stood near the garden table, speaking with Sarah. She wore a soft blue dress that moved gently in the evening breeze. Her hair rested over one shoulder, and the fading sunlight caught warm copper tones in it. Ethan watched her for a moment. A year ago, he would have looked away from a feeling like this. He would have warned himself not to hope too much. He would have called it dangerous. Now, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and felt the small velvet box resting there. His heart pounded so hard that he almost laughed at himself. Claire turned and noticed him standing apart from the others. "Ethan," she asked, "are you all right?" He walked toward her slowly. The garden became quieter, as if everyone sensed something before he said a word. Ethan took her hands in his. "I spent a long time believing that moving forward meant losing what I had before," he said. "But you taught me that love does not erase love. It makes room." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "You helped me understand that Lily will always be part of my story," he continued. "But she is not the end of it." Then Ethan lowered himself onto one knee beneath the Tennessee sky. He opened the small velvet box. Inside was a simple ring with a pale blue stone, the same color as the sky on the first evening he arrived at Morgan House. Claire covered her mouth with one hand. "Claire Morgan," Ethan said, his voice shaking but steady enough to carry through the garden. "Will you marry me?" For one long second, she only cried. Then she laughed through her tears. "If I were younger," she said softly, "I would marry you." The guests laughed, and Ethan smiled as Claire stepped closer. "But I think I am exactly the right age," she continued. "And so are you." Then she said yes. The garden filled with applause. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes while pretending she had something in them. Noah shook Ethan's hand, then pulled him into a quick, hard hug. Marmalade, unimpressed by the entire ceremony, walked across the grass and sat directly beside the ring box. Later, as the sun disappeared beyond the hills, Ethan stood beside Claire beneath the porch lights. He did not forget Lily. He did not stop missing her. But he no longer believed that grief required him to remain alone. Sometimes, the bravest thing a heart can do is not forget what it lost. Sometimes, it is choosing to open again. Sometimes, God does not remove the pain from our lives all at once. Sometimes, He sends a quiet conversation, a kind person, a porch beneath an open sky, or a moment that gently reminds us that our story is not over. Ethan believed that holding on to grief was the only way to honor the love he had lost. But God showed him something deeper. Love is not a small candle that goes out when another light appears. It is a fire that can keep growing. The people we have loved will always leave a mark on our hearts. Their memories do not disappear because we laugh again, hope again, or open our hearts to someone new. Maybe that is one of God's quiet miracles. He can take the places inside us that feel broken, empty, and beyond repair, and slowly fill them with courage, purpose, and unexpected love. In everyday life, many people are standing at their own closed door. Some are afraid to trust again. Some are afraid to begin again. Some are still carrying pain from a loss, a failure, a betrayal, or a dream that did not come true. But perhaps the miracle is not always that the past disappears. Perhaps the miracle is finding the strength to take one more step forward while carrying it. So do not let fear convince you that your best days are behind you. Do not believe that your heart has no room left for hope. God may be preparing a new beginning in the very place where you thought your life had ended. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us. Do you believe God can bring second chances when we least expect them? And subscribe to the channel for more stories of faith, kindness, healing, and hope. May God bless you, protect your family, heal the places in your heart that still hurt, and guide you toward the beautiful new chapter waiting ahead.